Pete Sepp joins us. Pete is the president of the National Taxpayers League, and specifically a conversation not only about what the NTU is, what they do, et cetera, but apparently our very own Keith Ellison, Minnesota Attorney General, is involved with other attorneys general from around the states, and also the DOJ in somehow trying to sue Google for something or other, wasting a bunch of money, wasting a bunch of time. Not sure the nuances. I've read about the lawsuit multiple times. It eludes me exactly what really we're talking about here. And Pete has reached out to help us out with that. Pete, welcome back to Ox in the Afternoon. Good to have you on.
Great to be here, sir. It's been a long time.
It has been. If it's CPAC or I don't know when the last time was that we had you on, but a long time ago.
Yeah, I think it was. But unfortunately, Washington and state capitals never change either. And this is the latest manifestation of government trying to jam itself into our economy, usually with disastrous results.
Well, as I understand, Pete, this is something where they're claiming that Google is operating somehow like against competition or against businesses somehow by what? Squeezing out or not? I don't really get it. So maybe you can give us the one sheet on this.
Yeah, there are really three issues at stake here and upwards of 4, maybe even 6 lawsuits coming on this with various parties involved, the Department of Justice, the state attorneys general, a whole mix of people. The arguments that the governments are making against Google, and you'll see these arguments get made against other companies too. Number one, Google's search results are biased against certain companies that want their results further up into the hierarchy that people see.
Okay.
This was primarily the complaint of folks like Yelp and Travelocity and TripAdvisor saying that our results aren't getting boosted enough. You're keeping competition down that way. Another contention, advertising, that it's very difficult to advertise on Google's channels without having to pay all kinds of separate fees and having to agree to load various apps and browsers on that Google supports. Apps is another area where you see a lot of legal activity. The Google Play Store is under attack for preferencing certain apps and certain software over others. Well, we've seen this kind of argument in many other contexts. In fact, the concept of having to tie products to your brand is something that the government tried to litigate when it sued Microsoft in the 1990s. Browser tying, they called that. Well, federal judges are getting wise to these lines of argument and saying, look, you're going to have to stop bringing these cases that are basically rewarding one set of billionaires over another and start thinking of consumers. It's called the Consumer Welfare Standard. It's been around for 40 years. It's guided antitrust decisions. And a federal judge very recently said to the government, this is a combined case of the Department of Justice and the states, including Attorney General Ellison, you're making 7 arguments here against Google. We're throwing out 4 of them. You can only proceed with 3 of them to trial, which begins in mid-September.
And so what position are you taking on this exactly?
We're saying that antitrust is becoming an increasingly dangerous weapon against not only tech companies, but all kinds of companies across the board. This is part of a collusion between the Biden administration, the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, attorneys general, frankly, in both parties, who are seeking greater power over the way companies work and compete with each other by using the courts, by using regulatory powers, by using more taxes. These things are very troubling to us because they all connect to taxpayers. As you know, NTU's been around for more than 50 years. Our mission is to protect taxpayers, work for fairer, simpler taxes, more budgetary restraint, less regulation. These kinds of actions fit right into our mission because the taxpayers' welfare, not only consumer welfare, is at stake when governments say, we're going to shut down companies that do too much innovating, that make too much profit, that do too much to contribute to the economy because governments are benefiting from the tech revolution too. That means taxpayers will begin losing out if that revolution is quashed by government action.
So the actions here are you think, or it sounds like they're seeking to punish Google because what are they accusing Google of, like taking bribes from some other companies as far as how they rank or rate or boost other companies' websites and things?
Well, they're really accusing Google of trying to have exclusive marketing arrangements for things like advertising and search that favor some companies over others. And you think, well, okay, but that's the way a lot of businesses work. I mean, there's the Kirkland brand that you see in the shopping club stores.
Right.
I mean, is that illegal? If it is, well, okay, then the U.S. government and the states get to determine how retail stores preference their products too. The problem here is the government has the case of trying to prove that this not only hurts consumers, but it hurts competition and competitors as well. Well, antitrust is really not a doctrine of rewarding some competitors over others with government preferences. That's not the way it should work.
Because it sounds like, right, that sounds like they're operating in our interests, right, to foment competition and to squash out, the big bad Google.
Right. It sounds like it, but that's not what they're actually doing. They're punishing Google to reward other multi-billion-dollar companies who don't like Google's practices. And once you get into government doing that, there are no limits. Sky's the limit. You can have lawsuits in any industry by any set of competitors asking the government to go attack somebody who's at or near the top of the earnings pile. And that means trouble. And, the American people get this at its base. When you look at the polling, for example, that we did in 5 states recently about what priorities attorneys general should be pursuing with their budgets and their money, I can tell you pursuing companies for antitrust was within the margin of error of the poll, 2 or 3% of people who thought that should be a priority, compared to, 40% saying that AGs should be prosecuting crimes like murder and human trafficking, or going after actual instances of price gouging or fraud from businesses. That was another 30-odd%. Pursuing antitrust cases is just not a priority among taxpayers, and it shouldn't be.
Interesting. And now, as we're seeing, right, to your point, the judges are seeing this as frivolous too because they've thrown out half of it or more?
Yeah, they are. And we hope they keep doing that. And we also hope that Congress keeps realizing that if you're going to do anything in the area of making laws around competition and antitrust, how about setting limits and definitions on what the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice should do? And we mean limits. Minnesota's own Senator Amy Klobuchar has proposed legislation, ironically named the American Innovation and Choice Online Act,
right,
that would actually way expand the powers of antitrust. That's the wrong direction.
Wow. Interesting angle. I hadn't thought about it that way, Pete. Pete Sepp joining us, president of the National Taxpayers League. So, National Taxpayers League, again, remind us what you guys do.
Founded in 1969 to work for lower taxes, simpler taxes, less wasteful government spending, eased regulatory burdens, and accountability from public officials at all levels.
Sounds simple. Absolutely. Well, we'll be watching this case. So that this is not done, obviously, if the judge just threw out a bunch of stuff, but the rest of them are still moving forward.
That's right. And the trial begins in mid-September. It's expected to be a pretty short trial, so we could very well be talking soon. In fact, I hope we can, and I hope it'll be good news.
Well, thanks for being a watchdog on this, Pete. Interesting angle. I would not have seen it under that lens, and you've given us a lot to think about. Thanks for being on. Thanks for reaching out.
My pleasure. Take care.
All right. Looking forward to talking to you soon. Pete Sepp with us, president of the National Taxpayers League on Ox in the Afternoon. Interesting angle. I love the comparison. The big bad Google, and it's really tempting, and, the guys just a bunch of, they do whatever they want and all that stuff. But, okay, so the government is going to come in and tell Costco that I'm sorry, but you can't, this is how you're going to arrange your products.